In a dusty county fairground where laughter sticks like flies to failure, a half-dead horse is led into the auction ring, limping ribs, showing eyes too tired to beg. No one bids. No one even looks twice, until a gray-haired woman with a soldier's gait raises her hand and offers half a cent. People scoff. Someone laughs out loud. But she doesn't flinch. She sees something they don't, something priceless, something that will change her life forever. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit subscribe. The heat in Spring County settled on the auction yard like a wool blanket, the kind you didn't want, but couldn't shrug off. It was late afternoon, the kind of day where dust hung in the air, and every breath tasted faintly of dry grass and old hopes. The horse auction had drawn the usual crowd, farmers with creased faces, a handful of horse traders whispering in corners, a couple of young men with boots too clean to have seen real work. They leaned against the fence rails, hats pulled low, eyes half-lidded, waiting for the next bargain or a flash of excitement. Though no one expected either from the day's last lots. The loudspeaker crackled. Next up, lot number 87. No papers, gelding 6 years old, cut and done with. The auctioneer's voice rasped with boredom and cigarettes. Somewhere to the left, a baby cried. Someone else coughed. They led the horse into the ring, a skinny creature coat the color of bad coffee and nearly as patchy right hind dragging every other step. The sun caught on his dull mane. There was nothing wild in his eye, no spark, only the blank fatigue of something that had learned not to expect kindness. He didn't look up, just waited, resigned, as the crowd muttered and shifted. A woman in a flowered shirt whispered, "Poor thing's ready for the glue factory." Someone else snorted in agreement. No one reached for a bidding paddle. The auctioneer thumbed the microphone, trying for levity. "Well now, what do you say we start this fine specimen off at it?" He paused, letting the words hang half a cent. "Anyone want a beginner's horse for the grandkids?" The ring broke into laughter. One man called out, "Might be more useful as fertilizer." Someone else added, "Pay me, and I'll haul him off myself." The joke was in the air, and for a second it seemed nothing would come of it. The auctioneer looked ready to wave it off, get on with his day, and send the horse on to whatever fate awaited things with no papers and no prospects. Then from the far edge of the stands, a hand rose. At first, hardly anyone noticed. It was a woman, older, hair gray and cut close, wearing a battered army jacket, faded nearly to green-gray, with the elbows patched and a regimental pin at the collar. She stood beside a splintered fence post, back straight, shoulders squared with an old discipline. "I'll take him," she said, voice flat but clear. "Half a cent." Laughter faltered. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked as if he hadn't heard right, then smirked for the crowd's benefit. "Sold then to the lady in the back." "Looks like we've got ourselves an economic miracle, folks," someone called out. "What's she want him for a retirement gift for the Senate?" Another voice chimed in, "Should have bought a used car, lady." But the woman didn't react. She just nodded, walked forward, and accepted the lead rope from the auction hand, a silent, sunburned kid who avoided her eyes. There was no handshake, no words exchanged. The transaction was done. The horse, now hers, stood without flinching, as if already braced for the next hard thing. She bent, touched the animal's neck gently, her eyes lingering on the hoof that dragged in the dirt. The world around them blurred into background noise, the clatter of an empty feed bucket, the drone of far-off conversation, the huff of engines in the parking lot. From somewhere behind her, a man muttered, "Why not just buy yourself a tractor, lady?" Or is this some kind of statement? If she heard, she gave no sign. She walked the horse awkward thin, moving slow across the lot. Their silhouettes were mismatched, one hunched by years, the other by sorrow and neglect. They looked like ghosts together, drifting past the rows of pickups and battered trailers. The woman's trailer was easy to spot, a silver skin dulled by time. A dent in the left door, the faded outline of a 7th Battalion decal still visible on the window. She let the wind sweep grit across her boots, waited for the animal to catch up before speaking. "Your name's Chance," she said, voice low and matter-of-fact. "That's what I'm calling you, because that's all either of us got left." She opened the tailgate, waited. The horse, Chance, now paused. His head lowered, considering the darkness inside. Then with no struggle he stepped in, as if the worst thing was behind him. The woman Cassidy Monroe, though no one at the auction seemed to know or care, closed the trailer quietly. She walked around to the driver's side, slid into the cracked vinyl seat, and wrapped her hands around the steering wheel. The scars on her knuckles caught the last of the sunlight. For a second she glanced in the rearview mirror, saw only dust and the auction ring receding in the heat. The laughter from the crowd faded behind her as she started the engine. The tires shuddered over ruts, and the truck eased onto the long dirt road leading out of town, toward whatever waited in Rustwind Hollow. Sunset flared red in the glass. In the rear view, the auction yard shrank to a blur, nothing left there for the living. Cassidy squeezed the wheel a little tighter, not from fear, but from habit. The journey home would take time. There was no hurry. She knew that already. Beside her, the seat was empty. Behind her in the trailer, a battered animal leaned into the sway of the road. They moved forward together, strangers tied by chance and loss, priced less than a bullet, yet somehow still alive. Night pressed in on Rustwind Hollow, with a hush that was never truly silent. It was an old land, older than fences, older than the cracked bones of the barns, older perhaps than memory itself. A sharp wind whistled through the line of pine trees beyond the back field, sending dry needles and brittle leaves scraping across the hard-packed yard. The trees were scattered, never planted in rows, like sentinels abandoned to their own slow work of keeping watch. In the darkness, their branches rattled and sighed, and every so often something small scurried across the porch. The horse barn stood apart from the house, its weathered frame hunkered down against the wind. Tin sheets flapped and shuddered on the roof, making a sound somewhere between a warning and a lullaby. Its silhouette, gray and hunched, merged with the night. The only light came from a kitchen window in the main house, a soft yellow square barely holding back the dark. That was where Cassidy Monroe tried again to find sleep. She lay on the old leather couch boots, still on a threadbare blanket thrown carelessly across her legs. The house was cold, but Cassidy hardly noticed. Her body had learned long ago how to ignore the kind of chill that seeps in after sundown. Her left hand rested near her hip, fingers curled instinctively around the hilt of a folding knife tucked into her jacket pocket. It was a comfort more than a precaution, a leftover habit from years when sleep could turn to panic in the span of a single breath. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easy. Her brow furrowed, breath hitching in her chest as the old dreams began to unspool. Somewhere far and close, at the same time, a radio chattered static, blending with voices in a jumble she could never quite unscramble. Sierra 12 come in Sierra 12 report. The words echoed clipped and frantic, the language of men and women who had learned how to keep terror on a tight leash. In the dream, she was back in the sand boots, filling with grit sweat burning in her eyes. Ray was there. Ray with the easy smile and the unlucky streak who'd once promised her a drink at the Rusty Spur when it was all over. Only it was never over. In the dream, Ray took a round in the thigh, fell hard, tried to crawl toward her with a look that was half apology, half terror. She lunged for him, bullets snapping overhead, dust and blood blurring the edges of her sight. She reached for his hand, but the dream twisted her fingers, grasped only sand, the world spinning. Then the black shape of a helicopter overhead, its blades slicing the sky, wobbling as tracer fire tore through the rotors. There was shouting, screaming, a wash of heat, then fire thick and oily pouring down in a night where the air itself tasted of burning. Someone was calling her name. Or maybe it was just the wind. Then darkness sudden and absolute. Cassidy jerked awake, heart banging in her chest, sweat cooling on her back beneath the army jacket. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Her hand went automatically to her belt fingers, searching for a sidearm she hadn't carried in years. The silence of the room was deep and heavy, broken only by the quiet tick of an old clock and the whisper of wind under the eaves. She let her eyes roam the small living room. Battered coffee table, cold stove, a photograph of a boy Benji, age 12, smiling from beneath a little league cap, the glass smudged with age. Her breath came quick, chest tight, as if the world had shrunk. She shut her eyes, let the air out slow, trying to push the memories back behind a door that never stayed locked. "It's just the first night," she murmured, as if saying it aloud could make it true. From the barn across the hard-packed earth and tangle of weeds came a sound, soft, rhythmic, alive. The thud of a hoof against wood. Not frantic, not afraid, just their marking time. Chance the broken gelding was awake too. Cassidy imagined him standing in the corner, head low, eyes dull. She wondered if horses dreamed, if they remembered the worst days, or if they simply survived them and went on. Chance gave a long, slow exhale, almost a sigh. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like someone who understood what it meant to be kept awake by old pain. Cassidy pushed herself upright, swinging her legs to the floor. She stood, joints aching, and crossed to the tiny kitchen. The ancient gas stove hissed to life with a match. She filled a battered aluminum kettle with water from the tap, set it to boil, and waited. In the hush, each small sound was magnified: the rattle of the kettle, and the metallic clink of a mug, and the whistle as steam began to rise. She spooned instant coffee into a dented tin cup, poured water, watched the dark swirl. She carried it to the table, sat down in the same spot she had every night since returning to Rustwind Hollow. She held the cup in both hands, warming fingers gone stiff with age and memory. Through the window, she could just make out the vague shape of the barn, a little sliver of lamplight catching on the metal roof. She spoke softly to no one, or maybe to everyone who had never come home. "Not every soldier who makes it back is really home," she said. "Some of us just find another place to sleep." She looked into her coffee, saw nothing but her own shadow. A fragment of cloth peeked from her jacket pocket. She pulled it out, the faded remnant of an old uniform shirt, her last name Monroe, stitched in fraying black thread. Folded inside was a small battered keychain in the shape of a Black Hawk helicopter, the paint rubbed thin by years of nervous fingers. She rolled it in her palm, feeling the edges, the cold weight of it. In the kitchen light, the metal glinted dull, scarred, still intact. Like her. Outside, the wind rose, tossing straw from the barn roof. Chance shuffled, then lay down in his stall head, angled toward the door. Cassidy imagined she could hear him breathing. She got up, moving slowly, and crossed to the front door, mug in hand. She paused, looked out at the empty yard and the lines of shadow and moonlight. The world was silent, except for the sighing of an old barn and the memory of radio calls that had no answer. Cassidy stood there for a moment, then turned back, eyes lingering on the shape of the barn through the night. "You survived," she said, voice barely more than a breath. "So did I. No one else needs to understand." She closed the door softly behind her, carried the cold mug back to the sink, and washed it clean. The house was still no comfort to be found, but she felt just for a moment that she wasn't alone in it. The night slipped on, unremarkable to anyone, but those learning again how to outlast it. There would be no rest, not yet. But as Cassidy lowered herself back onto the couch, she heard the barn settle, and the wind slow. On the first night, there were no answers. No warmth, only presence. Only the knowledge that survival for some was its own kind of victory. Cassidy Monroe's days began at 5, the hour that soldiers and cattlemen shared, the hour when the world was still half dream and half the work ahead. She never needed an alarm. Her body woke itself, remembering rhythms from a life long before this battered farm. There was no rush, no urgency to her movement, just a silent devotion to routine, the kind you did not question if you wanted to keep going. She'd pull on her boots, tug her faded army jacket over a flannel shirt, and move out into the dim light. The sun would just be a pale promise above the tree line, the air cool, sharp, and empty. Every morning was the same. Cassidy walked to the barn, unlatched the old sliding door as quietly as she could, and stepped inside with a fresh bucket of water in one hand and a bundle of dry hay in the other. She never announced herself. She did not speak to fill silence or to soothe. She placed the bucket in the usual spot, hung the hay over the rail, then retreated a step or two far enough for space, close enough for presence. Sometimes she sat at the end of the barn aisle, folding herself into a camp chair, hands clasped in her lap, eyes scanning nothing in particular. Chance would watch her the same way she watched him. He did not shy away, but neither did he come closer. They each kept to their own orbit, their mutual caution hanging between them in the stillness. It wasn't fear anymore, not exactly. It was the kind of careful distance two beings kept when they both understood how much it hurt to be wrong. By the third day, something small changed. Cassidy filled the water bucket and lingered for a few breaths, slow and unhurried. She noticed Chance dipping his head for a drink while she still stood near. She didn't celebrate. But a seed was planted, and the horse was watching her, not just bracing for her. Progress in this place came in quiet increments. She made a conscious effort to pass by with her hands at her sides, never raised, never carrying anything that might look like a threat. Chance watched her move, his eyes clear but cautious, his body language measured. He did not turn his back. When she tossed fresh straw into the stall, she finally spoke aloud, her voice low and gruff, colder than I thought last night. She remarked half to herself, half to the horse. The words seemed to hang in the dust between them, small and fragile, but not unwelcome. Each day she made a point to speak nothing commanding, nothing expected, just the steady, predictable sound of another living being. A weather report, a note about the fox she'd seen by the woodpile, her thoughts on coffee fencing wire or the moon. Chance grew accustomed to the cadence. His ears flicked, but he didn't tense. On the 5th morning, Cassidy tucked a soft brush in her hand and approached with all the deliberateness of a bomb technician. She paused just outside the stall, lowered herself a little, and waited. Chance looked over his shoulder ears, tilting but didn't back away. She entered, slow and careful, brush held low. She reached out, barely grazing his shoulder with the bristles. Chance flinched, at first a twitch, a shiver along his skin, but he did not move his feet. Cassidy waited and brushed again, a single gentle stroke. Chance narrowed his eyes, swiveled his ears, then acceptance. He stood for the next touch. Cassidy murmured, "All right, just a little at a time." Her heart beat slow and hard. Little by little, the lines between woman and horse grew fainter. By midweek, Chance would stand close to the stall wall whenever she entered, watching with soft eyes. When a motorbike rattled down the distant road, he startled but did not bolt, just turned his head, then lowered it again to the hay. He waited for breakfast, patient and calm, no longer rattling the feed gate as he had on the first day. None of these things were dramatic. No moment was a revelation. But Cassidy found that for the first time in years, she was not spending her days alone, even if her companion was a half-ruined gelding with a limp and a haunted past. On the 7th afternoon, a rare stillness fell over the farm. There was no wind, no traffic, not even the drone of an airplane. The sky hung low and yellow over the distant fields. Cassidy sat on a weathered bench in the shade of the barn, a chipped mug of cold coffee in her hand. She watched Chance grazing his head down, but his attention unmistakably on her. Something shifted inside her, gentle but sure. She spoke, her voice thick with old dust and memory. "Your name is Chance," she said. "You survived even when no one bet on you. And so did I. Maybe we both get one more go at this." Chance paused, lifting his head ears alert. Cassidy managed the ghost of a smile, the first in weeks. "When you get a name, you're not something to throw away anymore," she added, sipping the bitter coffee, breathing out slow. That night, she left the stall door half open, not by accident, but as a silent agreement. Chance did not try to leave. He lay down in the straw near the entrance, nose pointing toward the open air, on the line between outside and inside, blurred by trust and quiet hope. Inside, Cassidy flicked on the kitchen light, set her mug by the sink, and picked up a battered notebook she hadn't touched in years. She wrote in block letters, Day 7. He didn't run, and I didn't dream of gunfire. For a moment, the world outside was still. Cassidy looked out at the barn lights, soft against the dusk, and felt for the briefest flicker that company could be found in simply standing together, saying nothing, but not turning away. It was a late afternoon of scattered gold and shadow, not truly hot, but tinged with the dry ache of a summer that would not let go. The fields surrounding Rustwind Hollow were washed with light, each blade of grass flickering between green and brown, 1,000 subtle shades. Cassidy stood at the far edge of the paddock, her boots planted firmly in the trampled earth, her hands slowly teasing knots of dry grass from the patchy mane of the old gelding beside her. Chance tolerated the attention with a gentle stillness, shifting weight from one hind leg to the other, but never moving away. Cassidy's fingers worked patiently through the tangles, sometimes pausing, as if her hands forgot their purpose. Her gaze drifted from the coarse hair beneath her hands to the far horizon where clouds gathered over distant hills. It wasn't clear if she was seeing the landscape at all, or if her eyes had fixed instead on some old scene in her mind. A hush hung between horse and woman, heavy but not oppressive. And then, as if some current pulled words from her chest, Cassidy spoke. Her voice was low, even carrying the weight of memory more than the urgency of confession. When Benji was little, she said, pausing to pull a stubborn clump from the horse's mane, he loved horses more than anything else. Would ride a kitchen chair, tie an old broom across it, pretend he was chasing down outlaws across the prairie. A faint smile flickered over her lips, but faded quickly. He'd sneak out to the neighbor's fence, try to feed grass to their gelding. Didn't matter if it was pouring rain or cold, as sin nothing could keep him inside if there was a horse in reach. She fell quiet, working through another snarl of grass, and then added, "When I got out of the service, I thought I was coming home. But it turns out home isn't always where you left it. Not when you come back changed. Not when you bring the war with you." Cassidy's hands slowed her shoulders, tightening under the weight of old battles. Every night was a firefight. Didn't matter that the desert was half a world away, I carried it here in my head, in my bones. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming, or worse, I'd wake up searching for a rifle that wasn't there. Chance flicked an ear, unmoved but attentive. Benji was just a kid. 16, 17. He didn't know what to do with a mother who wasn't always herself. Some nights I'd yell at him without knowing it, thought he was one of the rookies back in the squad screwing up an order. One time I locked myself in the bathroom for hours. He had to break down the door. Cassidy shook her head, the lines at her mouth deepening. He started to look at me different after that, like I was a bomb that might go off any minute. She gathered the last of the grass, let it drift to the ground. Her voice dropped further, barely above a whisper. I made him afraid enough that one morning he just left. The memory hovered there, brittle and sharp as glass. He wrote a note, left it on the kitchen table. I'm okay, Mom. Don't look for me. I just need some quiet for a while. Cassidy's thumb rubbed absent-mindedly at a scar on her knuckle. I found it, read it, and I didn't cry. I didn't go after him. Wasn't mad either. Just thought maybe that's for the best. Maybe I'd already lost the right to find him. Chance shifted again, breathing soft and steady. Cassidy reached up, resting her palm on the horse's neck, the connection grounding her. People talk, she said, voice flat, almost resigned. They said I shouldn't have had a kid after the army. Maybe they were right. I told myself Benji was better off somewhere else. Told myself I'd just hurt him more if I tried to hold on. A silence fell. Only the creak of the barn in the distance and the faint brush of the wind through the dry grass. Cassidy took a breath, let it out slowly. I don't even know if he's alive most days. Haven't seen him, haven't heard his voice. Every time there's a horse auction in the county, I watch the boys leading horses through the gates, hoping stupidly that I'll see his walk his way of holding a lead rope. Like he might turn up older but not angry, and we'd just know each other again. Her hand tightened gently on Chance's mane. But it's never him. Just other people's sons. Other people's stories. She laughed softly, a sound with more ache than humor. Truth is, I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness, even if he gave it. That's not something you get by asking for it. Forgiveness, it has to be offered. Given. You can't demand it. I didn't go looking for him because I didn't believe I'd earned that right. Chance stretched his neck, lowering his nose to nudge Cassidy's shoulder. She turned surprised, then pressed her palm against his cheek, her breath evening out at the contact. You probably don't understand any of this, she murmured. But I think maybe you've been left behind too. Not just lost left. The two of them stood together in the failing light, bound for a moment by mutual absence. Cassidy's voice softened, as if she was practicing the shape of new truths. I didn't go after him because I was afraid. Not just of failing him again, but of what it would say about me. That I couldn't fix what I broke. That the best thing I could do was disappear from his life. She stepped back, gathering herself. I keep an eye out, though. Every time I drive by a ranch or see someone with a bay gelding and a crooked smile, I wonder. I know it's foolish. But I guess hope's the last thing to leave. She patted Chance's neck, then leaned her forehead for a second against his warm hide. I don't expect him to come back. I don't wish for it anymore. But if you ever meet a boy named Benji, you go with him, all right? I'll understand. The wind picked up, flicking bits of hay past her boots, tugging at the loose gray strands at her temple. Cassidy lifted her face to the sky, watching as the light shifted from gold to bronze. The blue was gone now, replaced by the coppery hues of evening, neither day nor night, but something in between. She stood there, not alone, but not quite whole. Either a woman talking to a horse in the shadow of memory, asking for nothing but the small mercy of being heard. And in that moment, it was enough. The training ring behind the barn was nothing much to look at, a simple, wide circle of packed dirt, bordered by a low, weather-worn fence. No banners, no shade, just sun-bleached ground marked by the ghosts of old hoofprints. Cassidy had built the ring herself years ago with leftover planks and scavenged posts, back when she believed a well-built fence could keep chaos at bay. Now 20 meters from the barn, she stood holding a lead rope, the morning already warming the air. There was no saddle slung over her arm, no crop, no bit or bridle, just herself a halter and the promise of time. She opened the gate and stepped inside, not saying a word. Chance lingered at the threshold, one hoof poised on the edge, ears twitching as he read the air. Cassidy waited. After a moment, he stepped in slow and deliberate, letting the gate swing shut behind him. There was no ceremony, no spoken ritual to mark the beginning. Cassidy turned her back, moving forward at a steady walk around the inside of the ring. Chance watched her muscles tight, uncertain whether this was a test or a trap. She didn't command, didn't urge him on. She simply walked, circling the ring with the rhythm of someone used to marching out their own ghosts. Chance began to follow, tentative at first. Whenever he stopped, Cassidy stopped too, glancing over her shoulder to see if he'd move. If he did, she moved with him. There were no shouts, no whip cracks, just the whisper of hooves and boots in dry earth, the subtle duet of breath and movement. For long minutes, they traced the same line in the dirt, a wordless negotiation. Once a pine needle fell from the distant barn roof, snapping on tin. Chance startled, head rising, eyes wide. Cassidy froze where she was letting the silence settle. No pressure, no punishment, just patience. When the horse calmed, she started again, softer, giving him the chance to decide if he wanted to keep going. After a 10-minute break in the shade, Cassidy on the fence rail, Chance at the far side, they returned to the ring. This time, his steps fell into sync with hers, not so stiff neck, relaxed ears, flicking for cues, but no longer braced for trouble. The tension between them loosened, replaced by a cautious kind of partnership. On the 7th lap, Cassidy stopped abruptly, no warning, no sign. Chance walked a few paces further, then halted. He stood still, sides heaving gently. Slowly he turned his head and looked back straight at her. It was not the wary stare of a cornered animal, nor the flinching of something waiting to be struck. His ears were pricked forward, his gaze clear attention, focused not on what might happen, but on her. Cassidy stood where she was, one hand on the rope, the other hanging loose. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then she smiled, a small, genuine thing, fragile as dawn, but real. It was the first time her lips had softened that way since Benji left. "All right," she murmured, voice catching in the still air. "We'll start from here." Chance didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped toward her. Not a rush, not even a careful approach, just a walk, steady and sure, closing the gap he'd kept for so long. Cassidy didn't raise her hand. She waited, holding her ground, until the horse's soft nose hovered by her shoulder. Only then did she reach out, fingers brushing his neck, in a gesture as much for herself as for him. Neither of them drew back. They stood together in the sun, shadows stretched long across the ground, two battered survivors sharing space with neither fear nor demand. That night, Cassidy returned to the barn after dinner, a quiet resolve guiding her steps. For months now, she'd kept a wooden sign nailed to Chance's stall door, a splintered thing painted in block letters, "Do not enter, private area." She'd made it on a night when the world had felt too sharp, when she'd needed a physical boundary to keep everything, herself included, at bay. Now, standing at the stall, Cassidy rested her palm against the sign's edge. She remembered the trembling in her hand when she'd written the words, the way her chest had clenched each time she saw them. Tonight her hand was steady. She unhooked the wire and let the sign fall away. She didn't throw it out, just leaned it against the barn wall, face down, letting the past rest unguarded. Chance looked out at her from the half-lit stall, his dark eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. Cassidy leaned in, resting her arms over the top rail. "You don't have to be kept apart anymore," she said, voice low and soft. "And neither do I." Before bed, she poured the last of her coffee into the battered old army mug she always used. Sitting on the porch, Cassidy gazed out toward the training ring, its circles still faintly glowing in the moonlight. She opened her worn notebook, its pages yellowed and creased, and wrote Day 10. He looked back at me, and for once I didn't turn away. Above the farm, the sky shimmered with thin, hopeful light. For the first time in a long time, Cassidy felt the possibility of a new cycle, a quiet trust forming fragile but growing. And in that hush, the ring outside became more than a circle of dirt. It was a circle of second chances, one she was finally willing to step into without fear of leaving again. The late afternoon sun was thin and washed out, glancing in pale strokes over the dry hills and the ragged grass behind the horse barn. Cassidy closed the wooden gate hands, steady even after a long day, and listened to the hush of wind sliding over the land. The world felt empty save for the quiet scuff of her boots on packed earth and the slow drip of water as she tipped a bucket for Chance's evening drink. She was halfway to the house when she heard it, the sound of tires on gravel, smooth, deliberate, and altogether out of place. The sound was too refined for a place like Rustwind Hollow. She set the bucket down, watching as a truck rolled to a stop by the front gate. It was a gray pickup, new and spotless, no dust on the fenders, no dings in the paint. For a moment, the truck simply idled there, engine purring as if uncertain whether to stay or go. Cassidy narrowed her eyes, not moving, not turning away. The sun caught the back of her jacket, throwing her shadow long over the yard. The truck door swung open. A young man stepped out, tall, all angles and awkwardness, but with a build that spoke of years of honest work. His flannel shirt was rolled at the sleeves, jeans faded and dusted at the knees, and his eyes gray. Watchful, carried a blend of caution and memory. He hesitated. Cassidy gripped the barn gate, steadying herself, as if the old wood could anchor her in the swirl of a moment she didn't quite believe. He didn't call out, didn't wave. There was no mom, no movie reunion. He just stood there, both hands in his pockets, eyes half on her and half on the horizon. Benji had come home. The silence was almost sacred. Cassidy's heart hammered in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. Benji didn't move closer. He stopped about 5 yards away, letting the gap remain. His voice when it came was rough, but steady. "I've dreamed about you, you know. Not the kind with words, just you walking through a field of burnt grass leading a lame horse. I couldn't see your face, but I knew it was you. Your eyes looked forward like you were searching for something that might never come." He looked down, scuffing his boot against the ground. Then Uncle Carl called. "Told me you'd been living like there was no tomorrow." He shrugged, trying for a smile and failing. So I got in the truck and drove. Cassidy's mouth twisted, part in relief, part bitterness. "Still haven't learned to warn a person before you show up, huh?" They both stood silent for a while, the wind catching stray threads on the clothesline and sending them dancing across the porch. Cassidy finally broke the spell, her voice softer now, but edged with something wry. "Nice truck. Too clean. Doesn't suit this place." Benji almost laughed a quick breath, and then he let it out slow. "Just borrowed. Don't worry, I'm not here to sell real estate." No one spoke for a long moment, but there was no rush to fill the gap. The quiet pressed between them, weighted by years, and all that had gone unsaid. Grass rasped under Benji's boots as he shifted his stance, his gaze flicking toward the barn. Chance had poked his head over the stall gate, ears pricked, nostrils flaring at the scent of a stranger. "That's him, isn't it?" Benji nodded at the horse, the lame one. "Should have known. You always did pick the ones nobody else wanted." Cassidy managed a real smile this time, half shrugging. Maybe I just recognize a kindred spirit. Neither moved. The distance between them wasn't physical, not really. It was all the nights apart, the silence, the stubborn refusal to ask for help or forgiveness. Cassidy didn't invite him in, but she didn't ask him to leave either. She stepped back from the barn, wiped her hands on her jeans, and started toward the house. As she passed Benji, she nodded once toward the kitchen door. "If you're hungry, there's deer stew on the stove. Bread's hard as a hoof, but you can eat it if you try." Benji fell into step beside her, carrying nothing but his keys. He didn't ask which room he should take. Somehow it didn't feel necessary. Inside the house felt like it had 10 years ago, as if time had simply circled around to this moment. A new mug sat on the shelf, but otherwise nothing had changed. Cassidy set the pot on the burner, ladled stew into chipped bowls, and laid 2 battered spoons on the table. They ate in silence at first, the only sound the scrape of metal on wood. Benji finally spoke, staring into his bowl. "I never wrote because I wasn't angry. I just thought you wouldn't read it." Cassidy didn't look up. "I kept every letter that came back, returned to sender. There's enough in the drawer to heat the stove through 2 winters." Benji's face tightened. He nodded, taking it in. "I think if I'd stayed, he said I'd have ended up hating you." Cassidy answered quietly. "I hated myself enough for both of us." There was nothing else to say, not yet. They sat together, chewing tough bread and memories. Afterward, Cassidy led Benji back outside, not bothering to explain or ask if he wanted to see the horse. She walked to Chance's stall, hand resting lightly on the top rail. Benji followed, standing just outside the gate. Chance regarded him with calm interest, ears at half-mast. Benji held out his hand. Chance sniffed, then lowered his head, accepting the greeting. "Smart horse," Benji murmured. "Doesn't trust easy, but he knows when someone's hurting." Cassidy stood by, silent eyes, fixed on the shape of her son's shoulders, the set of his jaw. "I didn't plan to keep him," she said. "Just thought he deserved someone to wait for him." Benji didn't look away from the horse. "Maybe you're not the only one who feels that way." That night, Benji took the old guest room. Cassidy stripped off the bedding and found a sheet she'd saved just in case. She left the door half-open, light pooling in the hallway. Before turning out the lamp, she lingered outside the door, listening to the even breath of her son on the other side. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered to the dark. "Just don't disappear again." The wind slipped through the window, cool and gentle, carrying away the last of the old chill. For the first time in years, Cassidy Monroe felt the shape of hope inside her chest, awkward, unfinished, but alive. The first light had only just touched the corrugated tin roof of the barn when Benji was already outside, boots brushing dew off the thin grass. The world was hushed, save for the distant complaints of a mockingbird and the low, familiar creak of the back gate as Cassidy checked the latch. She moved through her routines with the calm assurance of someone who'd lived by schedules for decades. But today, there was no plan, no need to fill the air with orders. They did not speak. There was no, "let's get started," no explanation of what to do next. Benji found himself moving into the rhythm of the place, as if some memory, his or his mother's, was guiding him. Cassidy checked the water bucket, tapped the fence posts to see which ones needed another nail, and slung a lead rope over her shoulder. Benji lifted a pitchfork, scooped hay, then set it down again, watching his mother's hands, her silent language. They seemed to drift into their parts naturally, like old dancers falling into step after a long intermission. Within the small circular paddock, Chance stood watching, head low, legs relaxed, but eyes alert. He did not pin his ears or swing away. He simply observed his gaze shifting between the two humans as they moved about the fence line. As the days passed, Benji learned quickly that the work with Chance was about attention, not command. Cassidy never raised her voice, never snapped a cue. Instead, she used the subtle pressure of her body and the soft, specific sound of a whistle. A two-note call for walk, a long, single note for stop. She showed Benji how to move quietly into the horse's line of sight, to breathe steadily and move with patience. "Don't raise your hand too quick," she reminded him. For him, everything used to be a command. "We have to ask permission now." Benji nodded, accepting the lesson with the humility of someone learning a new language, a language that had no words, only the silent grammar of trust. When he tried the whistle and gesture for the first time, Chance watched him for a moment, then took 3 slow steps back, just as Cassidy had demonstrated. The next day, Chance halted in the middle of the ring when Benji stopped moving, as if waiting for a reason to keep going. On the 5th day, the gelding stood quietly, while Benji laid a saddle blanket across his back, not flinching, just shifting his weight as if to say, "I'll try if you will." Every evening, Cassidy wrote notes in her battered notebook, not in the language of milestones or ribbons, but in simple private truths. Day 5, he met Benji's eyes for the first time. Day 8, no jump when the rope brushed his flank. Benji, oiling a saddle in the barn one night, said softly, "Every step he takes feels like I'm learning to trust again too." Cassidy only nodded, letting the moment sit between them. There were no grand breakthroughs, no sudden transformations. The progress was slow, the kind that only matters to those who are watching closely enough to see it. One morning, Benji found himself standing alone in the paddock, whistle in his mouth, Chance waiting nearby. He blew the signal short, then long. This time when Chance turned, he didn't just follow the command. The gelding stopped and then turned his head, meeting Benji's gaze without fear or challenge. It was not a guarded look, not a check for danger, but a question. "What now?" Benji took a breath, stepped forward. Chance didn't move away, just lowered his head, a subtle invitation. Benji reached out, not hesitantly, but as an offering, and placed his hand gently on the horse's forehead. Chance stood still, soaking in the touch, as if collecting the warmth for later. Cassidy watched from the fence line, her arms, folded, eyes bright. "He's not just learning to trust me anymore," she said. "He's learning to trust people again." Benji smiled, blinking back sudden tears. "And maybe I am too." They fell into a new pattern, an unspoken pact of work and rest. Cassidy would brew coffee in the mornings, her ritual as constant as the sunrise. Benji fed the horse, refilled the water, then joined his mother in checking the far fence line or shoveling out the shallow drainage ditch by the barn. The farm was not lively. There was no laughter ringing out across the fields, but it felt less haunted, less hollow. On the porch, in the hours between chores, Cassidy read from a stack of newspapers, so old their edges curled. Benji would mend a cracked horseshoe, oil a bridle, or simply sit and listen to the insects humming. Some afternoons, Cassidy would pull a wooden trunk from the corner and open it with hands steadier than she felt. She took out an old saddle blanket, its blue and red threads faded but intact. "This belonged to Cypress," she said, smoothing the fabric. "Kept him steady all those years, helped hold a broken spirit together. Maybe it'll help this one too." They draped the blanket over Chance, letting him smell it, feel its weight. The horse didn't object. He only sighed, closing his eyes for a few moments as if remembering something he'd never experienced. Each day, habits reformed themselves. At night, Cassidy walked the barn aisle without a flashlight. Her feet knew every rut and board. Benji hung the tack back in its proper place, no reminder needed. Chance lay curled in his stall legs, folded under eyelids, fluttering in dreamless sleep. On the 15th night, as Cassidy locked the stall door. She paused, glancing back at her son, who was securing the saddle rack. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice low, "but certain you take him into the ring." "By yourself?" Benji hesitated, his hand hovering over the latch. "Aren't you worried?" She shook her head. "No, he's already chosen you." Benji nodded, absorbing the trust without questioning it. In the house, lights glowed warm behind thick curtains. Cassidy made tea. Benji settled in the old armchair, and the farm so long ruled by loss and waiting felt, for the first time in years, like a place where things could begin again. There were no promises spoken, no guarantees. Only routine trust and the slow, hopeful work of starting over together. Preparations for the Spring County Fair began before the first trace of dawn. The old clock on the kitchen wall hadn't yet rung 5 when Benji was already up, moving about the yard in the cold half-dark. Spring County Fairgrounds sat 40 miles east, an old breeding ranch now reborn every April into a swirl of tents, banners, and loudspeakers, drawing folks from 5 counties for a few days of bright noise and the faint promise of prizes. Cassidy brewed coffee, strong and black, the scent steadying her nerves, as she wrapped sandwiches in brown paper and double-checked the flask. No one said much. Routines carried them forward like current in a stream. Benji tightened the trailer's hitch, checked the floor mats for splinters, and stacked his boots and show shirt inside an old wooden chest. Cassidy made sure the latch on the trailer's back gate was solid, then gave Chance a gentle rub along his neck. The gelding stood at the ramp's foot, pausing for a single deep breath, and then climbed aboard without protest. Cassidy and Benji glanced at each other, saying nothing but sharing a small private relief. It was as if Chance knew this morning was different. Not dangerous, not routine, just different in a way the three of them could feel. They rolled out before sunrise, truck and trailer cutting through the mist that curled above the ditches and barbed wire. Fields slipped by in shades of pewter and gold, old barns catching the new light like the bones of forgotten animals. Cassidy watched the landscape slide past, hands wrapped around her mug, her mind flickering between old memories of convoys and newer ones of roadside mailboxes. Benji hummed under his breath as he drove, one hand loose on the wheel, the other tapping rhythms on the dashboard, a nervous energy he couldn't quite hide. At the fairgrounds, the world opened up in color and clamor. Horses of every shade and stripe milled about sleek. Quarter horses, dappled paints, a few glossy Andalusians, with manes braided tight and ribbons in their tails. Stall doors clanged, trainers barked orders, and kids ran wild between the tents, sticky with caramel corn and cotton candy. Everything smelled like sun-warmed hay, diesel exhaust, and distant barbecue smoke. Benji led Chance from the trailer. The gelding stepped down, head high, but ears swiveling at every unfamiliar sound. His coat was short, sun-bleached gray. A faint scar crossed his hind leg, and his back swayed just slightly, a horse that carried his history in his bones. Other trainers watched as they passed, eyes sharp, judgment quick. One young woman, not much older than Benji, leaned over to her friend and muttered, "Horses like that should be retired out somewhere quiet, not brought out here to compete." Cassidy only shrugged, unbothered. Benji stroked Chance's neck and whispered, "No one else matters. Just keep moving the way we always do." They warmed up behind the arena, away from the busiest crowds. Benji checked the cinch and reins, then breathed deep, letting the chaos fall away. Cassidy watched from a patch of shade arms, folded her gaze steady. She caught sight of a family nearby, a little girl in a white dress, braiding ribbons into her pony's tail, her father snapping pictures. All around, voices rose and fell in a language of pride, hope, and nerves. When it was their turn, Benji led Chance into the ring, moving past painted rails and clusters of spectators. The trail course had been laid out in bright plastic cones and battered lumber, a gate to open, and close a wooden bridge, a line of diagonal poles, a tight turn against a fence, a backup station at the end. They waited for the judge's nod. Benji squeezed the reins, then relaxed them. "You ready, old boy?" he murmured. Chance flicked an ear. At the gate, Benji leaned in, pressing his shoulder to the latch. Chance halted without pressure weight evenly distributed. Benji unlatched the bar, pushed the gate open, and guided the horse forward. Chance shifted his body, stepping sideways in a neat sidestep. No fuss, no confusion. The crowd muttered, "That one's got a scar on its back leg. Didn't expect it to move so clean," someone said. But Chance showed no sign of pain, just the deliberate, patient steps of an animal who'd learned to pay attention. The bridge loomed next, its wooden planks shining in the sun. The two horses before them had balked hooves skittering at the echo of their own weight on the boards. Benji paused at the edge, waiting. Chance stretched his neck, sniffed the timber, then pressed a hoof to the first board. It creaked loud as gunfire. He paused, shifted his weight, then took the next step, slow, sure, not a trace of panic. His hind leg clipped the edge, drawing a wince from the onlookers, but he only reset his stance and kept moving. They reached the row of poles painted red and white. Benji exhaled, then gave the subtlest cue with his body. Chance threaded his way through, neither fast nor flashy, but precise. Not a single pole was kicked. At the tight corner, Benji cued him to pivot on his hindquarters, a slow, careful turn. Then came the last challenge, halt and back up 3 steps. Benji dropped the reins, whistled twice. Chance stopped, waited, then stepped backward 1, 2, 3. When he was still, Benji let his hand rest on the horse's neck, pride radiating from his touch. A hush hung over the crowd. Then somewhere in the stands, someone clapped. The sound spread timid at first, then louder applause rippling out from one cluster of strangers to the next. Cassidy's chest tightened. For a second, she was back on parade ground, only this time, the silence that followed was a kind of recognition, not obligation. The judges conferred, tallying their sheets. Benji stroked Chance's nose, eyes shining. When the results were read aloud, the words echoed across the dirt. Second place entry number 19, Benji Monroe and Chance. A polite burst of applause went up. First prize went to a young girl on a polished quarter horse, her ride nearly flawless. But when Benji and Chance took their lap of honor, it was the battered, gelding, scarred gray imperfect who drew every eye. The horse's walk was even, his eyes bright, his head held high, not in arrogance, but in quiet self-assurance. In the stands, a boy whispered to his father, "That horse looks like he knows he did something big." After the awards, Benji led Chance back to the trailer, Cassidy meeting them with a nod. She didn't reach out, didn't say, "Well done." Benji stopped, pressed his hand to the horse's cheek, and Chance leaned into the touch, the two of them holding, a moment only they could truly feel. Cassidy ran her hand over the saddle, not speaking. Benji looked at her, voice gentle. "You see it right? He didn't need fancy training. He just needed a reason to trust." Cassidy nodded, slow and grave. "And you gave him that." Benji shook his head, a soft smile flickering. "We all did. And he gave something back to us too." They loaded up the day's dust, settling behind them. The silver ribbon, second place, hung from the rearview mirror, twisting in the breeze each time the truck turned. No one reached for it. Chance rode quietly in the trailer, standing balanced, breathing deep, as if waiting for whatever came next. The sun flared red through the windshield, casting gold and copper streaks across the dashboard and Benji's forearms. Cassidy sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape blur by. Every so often, she glanced into the side mirror, catching a glimpse of Chance's silhouette through the slats of the trailer window, upright, alert, head high. She spoke quietly, voice more feeling than sound. The prize doesn't hang around his neck. It's in the way he holds his head now, without asking permission. They drove on quiet and content. For a moment, the long miles home felt lighter than all the roads before. The three of them, each once broken now mending, carried with them more than a ribbon. They carried the proof that sometimes the biggest victories came not from being perfect, but from daring to show up battered and whole to be seen as worthy of a second chance. It was a pale May morning, the kind where the grass still wore dew, and the sky seemed slow to wake. Cassidy heard Benji's boots crunch on the gravel before she saw him. He moved with quiet purpose from the barn toward the house, shoulders squared, a black felt hat shading his eyes. He wore jeans and a clean denim shirt, not his usual barn clothes. In his hand was a phone screen lit with a map. Something was different. She finished trimming the wild grass by the south field before heading in for breakfast, catching a glimpse of Benji as he poured himself coffee. The kitchen felt tight with words neither of them had spoken yet. They sat at the table plates between them, eggs, cooling toast uneaten. Benji was the first to break the silence. His voice was steady, unhurried. "There's a ranch in Montana," he said, meeting Cassidy's gaze without flinching. "A friend called. He needs hands for a cattle drive. It's just 6 weeks. They're short on riders who can handle the rough stuff." Cassidy didn't ask which friend or what kind of drive, or why now. She didn't challenge the decision with a dozen questions. She only nodded a slow and solid gesture. "If you know why you're going, then you don't owe me any more reasons." They ate in companionable quiet, the heaviness eased by the absence of struggle. As the meal ended, Benji sat a while, hands folded around his mug. Then softly, "If it's all right, I'd like to take Chance. He needs open space. I guess I do too." Cassidy paused, her spoon hovering above the plate. She glanced out the window. Chance stood by the fence, head tilted to the breeze, breathing deep. 5 long seconds passed a lifetime in the quiet. Cassidy finally set the spoon down, her voice a low hum. "So long as you understand a horse isn't something you own, he's something that trusts you once. Not everyone's worthy of that." She looked at Benji, her eyes clear but not hard. Benji nodded his reply, soft but certain. "I know. I won't abandon him. Just like I didn't abandon you." The sun had climbed higher when Cassidy slipped out to the old woodshed behind the house. It was more storeroom now than anything else, its walls lined with things she couldn't quite bring herself to throw away. She knelt beside a battered cedar chest, its hinges stiff with time, and pulled out a small tin box, its silver dulled by dust and years. She unlocked it with the slim key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were 3 items: a black and white photograph, a yellowed letter, and a round brass badge, her old battalion insignia wings, outstretched above 3 stars. Cassidy didn't bother to clean the badge or polish the metal. She wrapped it in a piece of desert camouflage scarf, knotted the cloth, and closed the lid with a click that echoed quietly in the empty shed. That afternoon, as Benji checked the saddle rig and secured the feed for the journey, Cassidy approached the trailer, her footsteps light but certain. She didn't hand the bundle to him directly. She just set it on the back seat, then turned away, watching the horizon. Benji found it when he loaded the last of his gear. He opened the scarf and held the badge up, tracing the faded design with a thumb calloused from years of work. Cassidy spoke not loudly, but with a clarity that needed no repeating. "That badge kept me awake in the nights when I couldn't tell real from nightmare. It's not a charm. Just a reminder, if you're alive, you have to live straight. I'm not sure I ever managed that myself. But now it's your turn." Benji closed his fist around the badge. understanding in his silence what words couldn't carry. The day unraveled quietly. No frantic packing, no scramble for forgotten things. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Chance was loaded into the trailer, standing steady, as if he understood this was just another chapter, not the end of the story. Benji checked the latches one last time, then turned to see Cassidy standing beside the truck. She didn't look at him directly, but stared at her own reflection in the window. Gray-haired, tired eyes, a face marked by years and weather. When she finally spoke, her words were gentle, almost playful. "The last time you left, I didn't sleep for 3 years. This time I'll wait for a letter. Doesn't have to be good news, just let me know you're still out there, still moving." Benji grinned, a soundless, grateful thing. "This time, I know why I want to come back." He climbed into the cab, hands steady on the wheel. Cassidy stepped back, keeping her distance, but not out of habit or hurt. She watched as the truck rolled slowly down the rutted drive, dust rising in a soft cloud sunlight, flashing on the trailer's metal. She stood at the gate, hand curled around the second identical badge still hidden in her pocket. As the truck disappeared behind the line of old willow trees, Cassidy turned for home. The world felt unchanged. The porch, the barn, the tangled grass, but the air was lighter, no longer weighed down by the fear of loss. Inside, Cassidy opened her battered notebook and wrote, "Day 24. He left again, but this time he took what's his." She set down her pen and let the quiet of the house settle around her. Out on the breeze, she thought she heard for just a moment the faint sound of hooves and laughter, echoing not from the past, but from the road ahead. The wind caught at the edge of her coat, and she let it, feeling at last not abandoned, but still part of the journey. The morning air was cool and damp, the kind of gentle chill that crept through the cracks of an old house and lingered even after the sun had risen. Mist clung low to the grass, shrouding the familiar outline of fence posts and making the world seem both smaller and wider than it was. Cassidy sat on the porch as she did every day, an old mug cupped in both hands, coffee inside long gone cold. She no longer noticed the taste. It was the warmth of habit she needed, not the heat of the drink. The barn door creaked in the wind, even though she had oiled its hinges the week before. The place was quiet. No soft knickers or impatient hoofbeats. No boots stomping out the last of sleep. No Benji humming to himself as he crossed the yard. Just the distant sound of the AM radio, a country song about love lost and found, sung by a voice older than memory, drifting through the screen door behind her. A white postal truck appeared at the end of the driveway. The mail carrier, bundled in a blue jacket, gave a small wave through the windshield, and with a practiced arm, placed a single envelope in the battered mailbox before driving off. Cassidy watched all of this through the slow rhythm of her breath, her face giving away nothing. She waited a few minutes before she rose and crossed the yard. The grass was slick under her boots. The letter was unremarkable at first glance. Plain envelope, no return address, the postmark already blurring at the corners. But the handwriting, leaning right in a way that looked like it was still learning to run, was instantly familiar. She brought it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and broke the seal with the careful hands of someone unwrapping old wounds. The paper inside was thin yellow at the edges, folded once, and spotted with a blur of blue ink near the bottom, where a thumb had pressed too hard. She read the words once, and then again, slow Chance crossed the river, like it was nothing. "You were right, he isn't broken, just waiting for the right person." Maybe I was too. There was no name, no sign-off. It didn't matter. Cassidy let the page fall open on the table. She looked at it as if the ink might vanish if she blinked, her fingers resting lightly along the crease. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply sat, the mug's chill pressed against the back of her hand, eyes fixed on the gap in the barn door across the yard, now hanging ajar. Outside, the breeze picked up, catching the edge of the letter and making it tremble, but it settled quietly as if the wind respected the weight of the moment. On the table beside the letter was an old keychain, a tarnished metal helicopter wing battered and scored from years of being held, dropped, thumbed in worry. She had carried it with her through half a world of violence, through every move and every loss. Now it sat silent, a relic no longer burdened with urgency. Cassidy closed her eyes and let the air move through the kitchen, listened to the ancient music on the radio and the softer, newer silence of the house. There was pain there, but less than before. The world was still incomplete. Her son was gone again, and the gelding stall was empty, but it didn't feel empty in the same way. Something in her chest was lighter. Something had settled. She stood and stretched, feeling the old scars shift under her skin. Her body was slower than it used to be, but this morning it moved with a kind of resolve that had been missing for years. She left the mug on the step and walked back inside her feet, silent across worn wood. In the back room, sunlight filtered through a high window, throwing dust into the air in golden streams. Cassidy crossed to the far wall where her riding tack still hung the scent of leather and oil, thick with memory. She ran her fingers over each bridle, each faded rein, until she found the old saddle, the one she'd used with Cypress, stitched and restitched, a lifetime of repairs visible in every thread. She didn't bother to clean it. She didn't try to restore its shine. Instead, she lifted it 2 hands steady and carried it outside. The ground was uneven, but firm under her boots. She walked across the yard, the barn growing larger in her vision with each step. The door swung open easily on its new hinge, a repair Benji had made before he left a small mark of presence left behind. The stall was empty. No chance, waiting, no warm breath against her palm. But there was fresh straw in the corner, a full water bucket, and a faint promise in the air. Cassidy set the saddle on a wooden hook, gentle as if laying down a memory at last in its rightful place. She stood there for a moment, hand on the old leather eyes closed. She could smell the saddle soap Benji had used, hear the echo of hoofbeats in the walls, and feel rather than see the space that had opened in her life, no longer aching, but ready. Outside, the wind rustled the new hinges on the gate. The barn no longer groaned. It whispered. Cassidy turned and looked back toward the house, then further down the gravel road into the brightening morning. She did not expect a figure to appear, nor a familiar shape to crest the rise. But neither did she close herself off from the possibility. Something had changed in the long quiet. She could feel it in her bones. The letter lay open on the porch table, its message settled as secure as any lock or promise. Cassidy did not rush to gather it in. She trusted the wind, trusted the sun, trusted the space she'd made in herself to hold what had come and what might still arrive. And for the first time in a long time, Cassidy Monroe did not sit apart from her. Life did not wait for news or fear its absence. She walked out into the day, into the low mist, the scent of grass and leather, and let herself belong to the world that was left. This, at last, was not an ending, but the gentle, steady work of beginning again.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.